Did that work for you?
Yes, it did.
Perfect. Awesome. So, and who will give instructions, Claudia or Christina?
I can give the instructions.
Perfect. All right, we're going to go live now. So 1 second, please, everyone. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good to have you with us. Those of you joining online, good to have you with us as well. We'll go ahead and call our meeting to order this morning. We are also simultaneously translating our meeting into Spanish. We have Claudia with us, and we'll be giving the instructions for those who would like to listen in Spanish. Claudia?
Thank you. Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos. Los servicios de interpretación en español van a estar disponibles de una manera simultánea. En unos momentos que se encienda ese servicio, ustedes van a notar en la parte inferior de su pantalla, en medio, un globo terráqueo o un símbolo de mundo. Ustedes pueden hacer un clic en ese icono y se les va a proporcionar la opción de seleccionar inglés o español. Va a poder seleccionar español. En cuanto lo hagan, ustedes pueden disfrutar de esta junta de una manera simultánea. Ahora, si se encuentran en su celular o alguna pantalla, una tableta, entonces ustedes pueden notar 3 puntos en la parte superior de su pantalla a mano derecha. Debajo de esos 3 puntos pueden hacer un clic, un chasqueo donde dice More o más. Y de nuevo se les lanza el globo terráqueo, otro clic y se les da la opción de elegir el idioma de español. Estos 3 puntos también los pueden tener en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Cualquiera de los dos funciona. Muchísimas gracias. Estamos a sus órdenes. Thank you, sir. Back to you.
Thank you, Claudia. Appreciate that. If you will, join me for the Pledge of Allegiance at this time.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Josh, could you do a roll call for us this morning?
Yes, sir. Rachel Arizmendi. Don Cameron. Here. Janae DaCosta. Mike Gallo.
Here.
Glenda Humiston. Here. Julia Jackson. Bryce Lundberg. Here. David Mancera.
Here.
Michelle Pissarro. Doria Robinson. Joy Sterling.
Here.
Patricia Stock.
Here.
Chris Valadez. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. All right.
You surprise yourself.
All right, then we're going to move on to the approval of the minutes from our last two meetings. We had one meeting on April 30th, and we also have a second meeting May 1st. We had back-to-back meetings, one in each month. So we'll need a motion to approve the minutes. We do them both together, Josh?
Yes, we can.
I move to approve both months' minutes. So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
We need to do roll call, too.
You need roll call on the vote?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Don Cameron.
Aye.
Mike Gallo.
Aye.
Glenda Humiston.
Aye.
Bryce Lundberg.
I was not at the May one.
David Mancera.
Not at the meeting.
Joy Sterling.
Joyce, did you say Joy?
Yes.
Yes.
And Patricia Stock.
Yes.
Perfect. Minutes pass.
All right. Thank you. We're going to move on to the departmental update. Secretary Ross.
Okay, I promise to try to be brief, which I say every month. I know that. This month, we announced 2 new division directors. Victoria Hornbaker, who has been the division director for our citrus program, is now the plant health and pest prevention director. And then starting, I think, next week, this week, is Fred Gomez, who will be our new agency information officer. So we're excited about making their transitions, and very grateful Dr. Andy Klein served as interim plant health director through the massive fruit fly challenges the past 9 months. Very grateful to him and Joshua Kress, who helped step in and backfill Andy's position. And David Gutierrez is going to be the interim director for the citrus program. So everything, all operations are go. Smooth sailing ahead, we hope. And so speaking of the fruit fly issue, just an update on that. We have finished the massive fruit stripping, tons and tons and tons of fruit, but that is now completely done. It was very important to get this accomplished before the weather heats up even more, because this is about interrupting the life cycle of the pest, gives us our best chance of what we hope will be a drastically reduced number of fruit fly finds this year. We're being realistic about the possibility of some finds. There have been a few, but it's been minimal thus far. So we hope that all of the strategies that we've incorporated are working. And I do have to say, one of the things that has made such a big difference in this particular program, which just proves the importance of investing in very early community outreach and engagement across the various languages of the diverse communities we do these projects in. It's absolutely critical to our success. We have been dealing with 7 quarantines since last summer. One of those was released earlier in May. That was one in Santa Clara. And we should be able to announce a second release of a quarantine, hopefully. I don't want to jinx it, so I'm not going to say where, but it's also in Northern California. So it was a big project, and we really appreciate everyone's work in helping with that. Last year was just one of those years. It wasn't just a fruit fly. The fact that we had 2 species of fruit flies that have never been found in the Western Hemisphere before, the sheer number of oriental fruit flies. This is a great time for us to be making the investment with our partners, the ag commissioners, in this really deep evaluation, data analysis of high-risk pathways. What has changed? How should our resources be allocated going forward? So this was a good time for that. The other time-consuming thing that Dr. Jones and her team are doing in animal health is continued highly pathogenic avian influenza, announced earlier this month of our first live bird verification in an urban market. We are one of many states that do not have the influenza situation with dairy herds. There are now 67 herds in 9 states that have been identified as of the last count. We also just last week had the announcement of a 3rd worker on a dairy farm. They're very mild symptoms. We're working closely with our Department of Public Health to distribute protective equipment, because we know that that will provide the protection for those workers who come into close proximity with animals generally, and trying to make sure that those are easily available. USDA did announce a very generous program to make resources available for farmers and dairies to do testing and provide that equipment. And so we continue to work on that. We also, in May, had FDA announce their samples of milk samples they've been doing from bulk tanks to assure that pasteurization does in fact kill the live virus. And I'm happy to say that our milk supply is safe. We're helping all of our friends from health departments better understand how milk movement does happen, that the monitoring's in place. We've got close collaboration. And I just have to say that Jenny Lester Moffitt has been a very important player in the national response on this, and she deserves a lot of praise for her steady, calm leadership on all of this. Wanted to also touch on the fact that we just finished celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and I had the pleasure of interviewing our board member, Rochelle Arzamendi, for that, and we just posted that on the last day of the month. That was a fun one to do. Be doing a tour of farm worker housing with the secretary from Business, Consumer Services, and Housing, as well as the Labor Secretary and the chair of the Ag Labor Relations Board on Thursday down on the Central Coast. Looking forward to viewing those sites and having a further discussion on farm worker housing and the needs for that. Wanted to mention that both our Division of Measurement Standards as well as our organic program both had confirmation of significant fines that they've levied. I might have mentioned the one on the adulterated organic fertilizer at the May meeting, but that was upheld by an administrative law judge, maintaining the integrity of the California Certified Organic label. And then GMS is always involved with investigations, working with DAs on misleading labeling, mischaracterization of the amount that may be sold. And two of our investigators were honored at an event in San Diego County that also had a very significant fine in regards to that one. So our people are out there making sure that when we talk about an equitable marketplace, there's many ways that we enforce that. It's not just the inspections that we have for quality standards, for commodities. There's a lot of very direct consumer protection involved with all of that. The last couple of things I wanted to touch on is that we had an excellent second summit on methane emission reductions. This was done with the Clear Center at UC Davis. And this one for this year focused on feed strategies as a solution for enteric fermentation. USDA Undersecretary Robert Bonney was able to join us on the first day. They more than doubled the attendance from last year. So we had over 270 people in the room in addition to online attendance. We had 50 different presentations, and a number of them from countries around the world, and really working together to find solutions. And then the week after that, just last week, beginning of last week, FDA put out a letter on a product that will now be available in the commercial marketplace. This product cannot make any claims on enteric fermentation. It's still not clear what the feeding guidelines will be. I think it will be blended into feed product. There's still a lot of unanswered questions in that because it's still characterized as a drug through the FDA process, but they had no findings that would cause concern to prevent it from being commercialized. But this really underscores the importance in rapidly changing technology and science, that our regulatory framework doesn't always fit that. And that's the situation that FDA has found itself in. And it underscores the importance of a bill in Congress called the Innovative Feed Act to really have an alternative pathway for feed additives as opposed to drugs, and being able to give people more certainty of how to use product and what the quantified enteric fermentation reductions could be out of that product. So interesting time to be involved in all this. The last thing, since Doria isn't here, the regenerative agriculture work group was it a full day meeting in May? Probably have at least one more coming up. And then, Mr. Chair, you might be getting something yet this summer, but I'm looking at members of that committee. That's what I hear. There was good progress. We've had a number of workshops, a lot of very robust input. So I know you're all looking forward to that. And then I wanted to remind everybody that the initial draft of the regulatory realignment project that we're doing with the State Water Resources Control Board has been out for public comment. There will be 4 different public workshops around that throughout the month of June, and then possibly additional roundtable discussions to make sure that we got small farmer input, UC Cooperative Extension input, and others. That project will be ongoing the rest of this year with a final report and recommendations that should be out by hopefully May 1, if not sooner, of 2025. So if you get a chance, it's a big report. There's a lot of pages in it. I'd like to boil that down to some very succinct recommendations sometime soon. And with that, I want to apologize in advance to speakers and to the board members because I'm going to have to step out a little bit before 11 to go give a speech, and then I'll be back just in time for lunch. Always happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Secretary. Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Could we get that report sent to us again if it already was? Just because I do think we ought to be giving it a look and perhaps make sure it's a topic of some discussion. And oddly enough, I just got an email this morning from my brand-new, recently hired Regenerative Ag UC Cooperative Extension
Yeah.
Advisor. So we just got a new one on board, so
Great.
eagerly looking forward to that.
That's good.
Congratulations. All right, we're gonna move. Whoop,
Secretary Ross,
sorry, Brooke.
the regulatory realignment with the State Water Resources Control Board, I have not been tracking that. That sounds like a big project. It would be great to get a report, and would that be something like Northern California Water Association should be
I would-
engaged
Yeah,
on?
it really, we've had to really narrow the scope as a beginning point. I think one of the values of the report and its comprehensiveness is that it's a very objective third party that actually is informing us how many regulations farmers do face. And we were trying to look for ways to ease the paperwork burden of compliance and reporting specifically. But I would think that an organization like Northern California Water Agencies would at least want to be familiar with it to see how that might align with some of the work that you're doing. But this was really about individual farm reporting and compliance to see if there's a way of streamlining it without taking away the protections that are there for good reasons. And so we were pleased to have a partner in that. And I view that as a first step. And if we can successfully come up with some recommendations that would could be implemented, that might lead to some further work.
Well, I sure appreciate the administration's focus on that, Secretary Ross, that, you know, the focus on the cutting the green tape has, I think, has been really effective and a great undertaking. And if similarly we can maintain the protections but reduce the some of the cost, the time, and the maybe some of the redundancy, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's also important. I hear very often from different sources that agriculture is not regulated. And I think it's very important that we factually, instead of this, I still go back to my first days with Governor Brown, who would say, I can't fix over-regulation. Give me a specific, and we'll see if we can find a solution for that. I think it's very important to be able to state factually, here's a number of regulations that I have to deal with. And I think this is a document that could be pointed to. And I think that's an important part of our helping to set a level base of understanding of the regulations and how challenging it is for any organization of any size, but the smaller, the more challenging it is to know from labor, from insurance, from water, there's a lot of different compliance issues facing growers.
Absolutely, no question. And sometimes I wonder how some of these smaller growers survive in the regulatory environment that we all face. So,
Part of Governor Newsom's, I believe his efforts are in modernizing water rights, right? And at NACWA, one of our goals there is, you know, modernizing the data, modernizing enforcement, but also modernizing regulation, right? A lot of the regulation comes from 60s and 70s type mindset and 50, 60 years ago, right? And so modernizing the regulatory environment, I think, would be part of a great effort.
And that requires a great deal of trust building for people to have confidence that it's not anything other than a very stated and very real public benefit goal. Yeah.
so Bryce, maybe this is something we can take up later this summer in a water committee meeting. I think we should.
He's got to plant his rice first.
We
He's
have-
late.
No, but there are a lot of issues, as always, in water, and we probably should revisit, especially with the possible providing input here. So, thank you. Anything else on the issues we've been discussing here? I can tell you that you know, when they're predicting 100, over 105 this coming week, those fruit flies. They're either going to have run for cover or they're going to try to reproduce pretty quick. So we know that, you know, heat definitely makes insects move a little quicker. So, and really a thank you to all the work that they've done with the task force and and really getting this to where it's manageable. And yeah, I don't want to speak too soon. I know we've got a long haul, but it's good to see how fast things did happen and how well it was coordinated. So, thank you. Go ahead, Bryce.
Secretary Ross, thank you for the report on the fruit fly and the massive fruit fly fruit stripping program. I can only imagine how massive it is because of the size and scope of the quarantine. Is there any way that you could provide this is the biggest one that's been done before, and this is how big how many people, how many homes, I mean, it just, to me, I just have no idea.
That's a very interesting factoid, and I can't do that off the top of my head, but I know a geeky scientist who would love to dig into that data, and I'll be sure to text it to y'all.
Has it ever been undertaken anywhere else?
Not at this scale, even here in California, because these were large properties and small properties, and it was the community responsiveness and willingness and cooperativeness, and we couldn't have done it without CCC, for example. Conservation Corps was fabulous. A lot of seasonals. We hired a lot of professional fruit pickers, so farm labor that normally wouldn't have jobs this time of the year when this was going on. So it took a lot of hands.
And I think what that does is show that we can prevent serious outbreaks because we know there'll be more. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to our first presentation this morning. We have the CDFA budget update. Arma Kozina, the Deputy Secretary, welcome. Good to have you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And one day I'll be here to give you good news. But in the meantime, we'll talk about the 24-25 budget. No, there is some good news in there, so we'll touch on that. And I'll try to be brief, but it's a complicated budget this year, as it seems to be with every year these days. So I'll do my best to kind of explain all the moving pieces. All right. So as you mentioned, I'm Arma Kozina, Deputy Secretary for Finance and Admin. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to give you an overview to start with. So if you recall, if you are just really following the budget closely, the governor's budget in January, we were planning for about a $37.9 billion shortfall. It was pretty significant. That projection was off by about $7 billion. That went up by $7 billion when we got the actuals. There are a few reasons for that. Primarily, there's kind of a delayed recovery from the dip in the stock market, just the way that our taxes are structured. That has a pretty outsized impact on our budget. And there's something called capital loss carryover, so folks were able to carry over that loss to this year's budget, and so we aren't seeing quite the rebound that the stock market has seen in our budget. And then that combined with late filing, we weren't really able to deal with the budget problem in the current year that we were really experiencing. And so what you're seeing here in that total $44.9 billion shortfall is really, 2 years of combined budget issues. And then there's going to be further issues that are projected out for the next year. So just kind of giving you an update on where we were, there was $17.3 billion passed in early action. It was passed in April. And we'll go over this a little bit later, but those were actions that the administration and the legislature agreed on early to try to lessen the budget problem that we were going to deal with in May Revise. So that leaves about a $27.6 billion budget problem at May Revise for the 24-25 fiscal year. And then our portion at CDFA of the proposed budget includes about $118.5 million in reductions from prior year one-time general funds. The priority here is really still to protect our core functions and our core programmatic kind of baseline funding and really look closely at the one-time general funds that were left unexpended. And then $87.4 million was protected from prior year one-time general funds. We also we're one of the few agencies or departments with some budget change proposals moving forward. We have 6 budget change proposals totaling $168.8 million. 44.8 million of that was in early action. That was for invasive fruit fly funding in the current year, and then also for recovery at our Tulare calf slab. And then 124 million was proposed for the budget year. Primarily that was for our Blythe Border Protection Station and then budget year invasive fruit fly funding. There were a couple other technical proposals. So moving on to the next slide. This is just an overview of the budget process, just to give you a picture of kind of where I'm gonna come from in the presentation today. So I'm gonna let you know kind of what happened in that early action May revise in the governor's budget, but I'm gonna stop there. So there is a proposal from the legislature. There have been, votes in budget subcommittees. That bill's being drafted now, but it's a little early to kind of, budget negotiations haven't happened, right? And I can really only speak to the administration's proposal. So we're gonna talk about May revise, we're gonna talk about the governor's budget and early action, but we'll leave the final budget to when it gets finalized after we see the legislature's full proposal on June 15th. All right. So our maintained investments. We're gonna start with what we were able to protect in one-time general funds. So $42.9 million from the Farm to School Incubator Program was protected. That 10 million reduction was proposed as part of May revise. We were able to protect $24 million of methane reduction programs. Initially, this was protected by shifting it from the current year general fund to the budget year in Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, GGRF. That was adjusted a little bit in May revise, but it protected the bulk of that money in budget year in GGRF and then shifted a little bit to a further out year. This makes sure that we have enough money for matching for the federal Dairy Plus program. SWEEP, 20.6 billion was also protected. Initially, this was proposed to shift from, again, the current year in general fund to budget year GGRF. It was pushed out a little further to the 26-27 fiscal year. All right, just as a very quick recap, and I won't go through all the dollar amounts, but I just want to let you know for governor's budget, there were a number of programs where basically the amount that we had remaining was reduced. So that was the Healthy Refrigeration Grant Program, the California Nutrition Incentives Program, the Water Efficiency Technical Assistance Program, the California Underserved and Small Producers Program. This wasn't the total amount, this was the remaining 12.9 amount that was dedicated to drought, as well as the Farm to Community Food Hubs and Enteric Methane Incentives Program. Those last two were new programs that had been proposed by the legislature. There was also a proposed reduction of 18.8 million, leaving a balance of 46 million for the FPIP program, Food Production Investment Program at the California Energy Commission. This says that it was all liquidated this fiscal year. That was incorrect. My apologies. Found out yesterday. It has not been spent to date. So there's still $46 million in that program as proposed by the governor's budget. And then in May revise, the Farm to School Grant Program, you saw that on a previous slide. There was a proposal to reduce the Farm to School Grant Program by $10 million. This leaves a balance protected of $42.8 million for the current fiscal year. And that is for the RFP that was released in January. So the solicitation went out in January. We've received, I want to say, 140 approximately million in requests. I was going to say 120, so I was off. But
it was 20 million here.
yeah, here or there. So there's a pretty robust demand for that program. There's also a reversion of $2.8 million from the State Water Efficiency Enhancement Program. This had been initially intended to be part of the SWEEP offering, kind of bundled with that other 20.6, but since that 20.6 has been moved out to an out year, we reverted the 2.8 million. The $5 million was proposed as reduction from the California Underserved and Small Producers Grant Program. This is the $5 million that was flexible between both drought and flood. There was $2.1 million that was reverted from the Fairs and Expositions Community Resilience Grants. This was originally intended to be contingency funding if any of the projects were to go over. Now we're just gonna trust them to be on budget. And then there were a couple of smaller reversions to the Technical Assistance for Underserved Farmers program and the Pollinator Habitat program. Additionally, at our sister agencies, there was a proposal of $500 million reduced in water storage programs at the Department of Water Resources, a reversion of $5.7 million, that's the remainder of the multi-benefit land repurposing program at the Department of Conservation, and a reversion of $5 million or reduction in the drought and flood relief program at GoBiz. All right, so early actions. So in addition to, those were the proposed reductions in the governor's budget and May revise. In the interim, there was also some early actions and some statewide reductions. So in early action, there was an expenditure freeze. So this was really intended to give us a true understanding of what the remaining balance was on all of these programs and accounts. There's a lot of moving pieces, and unless there's a freeze, it's very difficult to know at any given time how much is available. So this freeze did impact our ability to execute agreements for the Urban Ag program and the Healthy Refrigeration Grant Program, the most recent solicitation. Those projects were awarded, but because of the expenditure freeze, those contracts have not been executed because this applies to all one-time general fund appropriations that had a remaining balance for the entire appropriation over $1 million. There's also a couple of small reappropriations that were impacted. And then there's also a position sweep. There was a high-level estimate of kind of what statewide savings might be available from a position sweep for fiscal year 24-25, as proposed in the early action. I believe it was $173 million. We're not sure exactly what the details of this or how they will impact CDFA in the budget year. We just want everyone to be aware that this is happening. In addition to that, as proposed by May Revise, there's a proposed 8% reductions in state operations. This will apply to all state agencies. At this time, it's unclear kind of what the exact impact of those reductions will be for CDFA activities, but we'll make sure to keep the board updated as information becomes available. Okay, I promised there would be a little bit of good news, so here it is, right at the end. Please only ask me questions about the good news, no. So in early action, as I mentioned, there was money for the invasive fruit fly response in the current year. So for fiscal year 23-24, that was $22.1 million. There was also invasive fruit fly response proposed in May Revise for fiscal year 24-25 at $24.9 million, as well as an increase in federal authority so that we would be able to spend against the CCC funds that were awarded from USDA for fruit fly response. There was also in early action $22.7 million for the California Animal Health and Food Safety, our CAFS laboratory. That's recovery from the pretty extensive flood damage that was incurred at the Tulare facility. I will say none of the budget is final except for these early action items. These are done. So we're very excited to have those two items and have the support of the administration and the legislature on those. There's also a proposal for the Blythe Border Protection Station relocation project. This is the construction phase for that project of $99.1 million in bond funding. And there's position authority related to AB 402, the broom rate program. I believe 7 positions, if I remember correctly. So, and then the last, if you were counting, I did say there were 6 BCPs. The last one is reappropriations. It's a little in the weeds, so I didn't think you wanted to know all of that. All right, so that's your budget as it stands now for fiscal year 24-25. I'm happy to come back in a month when all of this is completely different, but yeah, and I'm also happy to take questions.
Thank you, Irma. Do we have a question from the board?
We're still not sure of ours either. We think we're looking at a 2.9% cut, but it's unclear. Next year, possibly up to a 7% cut. But most of our one-time funds are fully encumbered, so we didn't get anything swept back. The only 2 funds we were concerned about was fire advisors and the Nutrition Policy Institute doing some school lunch studies. You know, I think like everybody else, we're waiting to see what the next month the next couple weeks at this point brings, yeah.
Did I miss Healthy Soils?
Yeah, if you didn't hear it, it basically means that that funding is out the door and there's no new funding proposed. So for all of these programs, unless it was explicitly mentioned as being shifted to GGRF, there's no new funding that's been proposed.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from our members that are online? Okay.
Oh.
Bryce, go ahead.
Thank you for the good news at the end. That was really nice.
Good place to put it.
The sweep funds that are being pushed forward, will those funds, or the proposals that are in, will those be notified now and the funds put out later, or will all of that be delayed until the whole process delayed for a year?
Yeah, the solicitation hasn't begun. I think there was maybe like a week, but we didn't have any complete applications in that period. So all of that funds will go out in a new solicitation. Also, because it's being shifted from general fund to greenhouse gas reduction fund, there's some very specific requirements around the quantification methodology to make sure that we're verifying the greenhouse gas emissions reductions of each of these projects. And so we'll go through a process with the Air Resources Board before that solicitation in 26-27 to make sure that we're able to accurately quantify all of those emissions reductions.
And I'll just be the cautionary tale here. Out-year budgeting is not a routine. We've done it with one-time funds, and as we've seen, one-time funds are usually the first place to go for reductions. So no one should take it to the bank because it's 26-27.
Yeah.
You know, as remembering during the Brown administration, there were significant cuts, and they seemed like draconian, especially to the fairs in California. You mentioned about the fairs. Are the fairs going to be okay in these cuts, or what do you think about the local?
So the fairs have not had funding for operations since 2011-12. They have, and then they had the extraordinary circumstance of not being able to do any operations other than emergency response throughout the entire 2 years of COVID practically. So no events that were generating, because many of them have added so many more events and really maximizing the use of their venue to be more self-sustaining. And so with one-time funds, we were able to fill that hole with $50 million. And they passed legislation before COVID to be able to get a small percent of sales tax that's generated on their property by events, which could be fairs or trade shows or other things. The estimation of what that would generate has turned out to be much lower. Now, of course, that's also because there were 2 years of not being able to do events. There is legislation still alive in the legislature to increase that percentage to closer, it was less than 1%. And I've lost track of, they wanted to go to 7, and I think it's down to more like 2.5 or something. Hasn't passed, don't know if it will, and that's kind of a budget year. So they're still having to be very innovative in generating through events activities that can help pay for them. Where we have a state obligation, and the challenge is all of those buildings that are state-owned and deferred maintenance and the issues that come with that. And this community resiliency funding was really about, as you think about your facilities as a cooling center, improved evacuation center, wintertime heating, think about how you can also make it more useful as a community gathering place.
All right, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Irma?
Thank you, Irma.
Oh, pardon me, hang on.
If you'd like to make public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I can unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
All right, thanks again. We'll look forward to hearing from you once things firm up toward the latter part of June, early July.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to move on to our next presentation, Sigma update. That should take a couple hours. So Tim Godwin is with the California Department of Water Resources. Tim's a special advisor to the Deputy Director for Sustainable Groundwater Management at the California Department of Water Resources. Good to see you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us, Secretary Ross, President Cameron, and board members. Really appreciate the opportunity to come before you and provide a brief update in terms of how Sigma is progressing and really some of the lessons learned. I think this is kind of a good opportunity to circle back on what was a very wet year in winter of 23, and talk about our resulting groundwater conditions and all of the specific activities of all the local GSAs and other property owners to really advance Sigma implementation and reach for sustainable groundwater management conditions. Do I have control of slides, Josh? Okay, no worries, thanks. Next, and probably next. So I'll start off with a quick update of Sigma. Unfortunately, Paul Gosselin, our Deputy Director in charge of Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, is been redirected for the San Joaquin Collaborative Action Plan meeting down in the Valley currently, so he's asked for me to step in, but he uses the term we're at the end of the beginning, right? And I think it's a significant milestone of Sigma. What this slide is really depicting is all of the hard work over the last several years of all of the local agencies, landowners, to come together and talk about what it means to be sustainable at the local level. How are we going to manage our groundwater and water resource conditions so that we can have reliable water supplies moving forward? So what this is really illustrating is it's a map illustrating just the distribution of the current state of play for groundwater sustainability plans. So those in green represent 71 basins that have approved groundwater sustainability plans and are actively implementing those plans. The purple have been found to be incomplete. If you recall back with the 2020 plans, we had several that came up as incomplete. What that means is they had deficiencies that didn't allow us to approve them, right? Just close enough, right? So they've been given 6 months to rectify these deficiencies and get them back to the department for review. We're hoping that based upon consultation, we've been meeting with all of these agencies frequently, that they'll be able to address those deficiencies and have an adequate plan moving forward. However, I mentioned the critically overdrafted basins that came in early and went through this process. We had several that went through this incomplete process and developed an adequate plan as a result. However, 6 did not. And those 6 basins have been found to have inadequate plans and have been referred to the State Water Resources Control Board for consideration under state intervention and probation. There's currently only one basin that is in probationary status, that is Tulare Lake Basin. And I'll say all 6 are actively working collectively to address the deficiencies and resubmit to the state board to get out of probation. And that is the intent and stated intent of the board as well as the department, is to maintain local control of this. So we're really working hard to help those local agencies get organized, define sustainability, and develop a plan for them to maintain these conditions moving forward and back into local control. So it's tough to say this is a great picture, but I think it's a good picture. I mean, 71 basins really stepped up. They've defined the sustainability, and they have plans to implement it over the next 20 years. And those others are working hard to address those deficiencies and get back on track. Next slide, please. So where do we stand for the local agencies? As I mentioned earlier, there's a 20-year horizon for these plans to be implemented and for them to achieve the sustainable goal. I'll just reiterate, the sustainability goal is really the avoidance of 6 undesirable results. Those undesirable results include chronic lowering of groundwater levels, depletion of storage, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, subsidence conditions, and the depletions of interconnected surface water. So I'll touch on a couple of those items as we move on about future guidance and how we're going to move forward. But what's happening right now with the GSAs implementing their GSPs, annually they're developing reports on the conditions in the basin, actions that they've taken to implement their plan, maybe troubles that they're having, and that's really helping inform the department about how we can adjust our other hat we wear in this program, and that's one of assistance. We've traditionally provided technical planning and financial assistance as part of this program. As we just heard from the previous speaker, the budget's a little leaner now, so our financial assistance is correlatively leaner, and really we don't have a lot of programs that we can roll out at this time. But there have been significant monies rolled out to implement these plans and refine them and move forward. So we're hoping that we can help to implement those through a number of measures I can touch on later. Periodic evaluations, formerly known as the 5-year updates, or also known as, right? So we've heard of several different ways of looking at these. We're trying to reel this back to the statement in the law itself. And we're required, the local agencies are required to periodically evaluate, no less than every 5 years, how they're doing on their plan. So these aren't complete rewrites of the GSPs. They're simply an assessment of how they're going. It's also an opportunity to consider maybe the plan needs to be amended, and that's okay too. They can amend these plans as they learn more about these basins and adapt to what they're seeing in the basins as to what strategies are going to be necessary to achieve a sustainable conditions. So I think this is a nice adaptive management graphic here, really shows this kind of cyclical nature that we're going to be looking at the data with the local agencies. We're going to be seeing these opportunities. We're going to be adapting both plan implementation and our assistance programs to support this. So we're really committed to really helping these local agencies achieve those objectives. Next slide. So what's the department doing in this sense as we turn towards implementation? We're terming this basin stewardship as our role. Our intention is to really become more engaged with the GSAs in the implementation of their GSP, providing those resources as they may desire. So we're going to be in the trench with them, tracking, understanding what the challenges are, and ideally working collectively to find those solution sets. That's really an exciting opportunity. That's where the state's function as assistance can really be most effectuated in actually getting these plans implemented and addressing some of the challenges. Some of the big ticket items are coordination. Some of those deficient plans that are with the board now were largely about how things were coordinated at the local level. Really challenging to come to consensus across a basin scale area to agree to a common set of goals and objectives. So this is really a big lift for everybody, but we're also going to take it the next step, right? So we have to acknowledge that these sub-basins, although they are big, they are still part of even a larger basin. So the Central Valley as a whole is a basin. We have the San Joaquin Valley, we have the Sacramento Valley. They're subdivided into a number of small basins, and how each of those sub-basins operate affects the next door neighbors. So it's about being a good neighbor, understanding what those conditions are, and how we can manage this collectively with clear agreements about what those thresholds are and how we're going to maintain sustainable conditions, but also avoid those undesirable results. We're going to be releasing new guidance. I'll touch on that in a little bit. Again, with the submission of all of the annual reports, we're drinking from a fire hose of data now like we've never done before. It's amazing. And just for everybody's awareness, all of this data is provided open and transparent through the Open and Transparent Data Platform, CNRA, as well as the SIGMA portal. So this is where GSPs are submitted and all of the information about the GSAs and the data they submit. So this data is accessible for all to review, but more importantly for neighbors to understand how these various basins are functioning and where opportunities exist. we're moving forward Bulletin 118. We're really pushing on basin characterization. The image you see next to this bullet list, you see the helicopter with the large hoop down it. You may have heard about this before, the aerial electromagnetic geophysics, AEM. And it is effectively a geophysical technology that's allowing us to penetrate up to 1,000 feet in depth and understand what the geology and connectivity of these aquifers are. It's really important when we're talking about managing these systems. Many of these basins are in overdraft. They're pumping more water than is getting replaced. All of these basins are seeking to enhance recharge opportunities. How can we capture high flows, get them back into the subsurface, and store them in our natural green infrastructure in our groundwater systems? So this is technology that's really helping us advance those, prioritize those key recharge areas, and effectuate change. We're advancing modeling resources, both through just the model itself, the numerical code, but as well as our Central Valley models. The USGS just recently released the new Central Valley hydrologic model update, and we continue to advance the C2 VSIM fine grid model that's being advanced by the department for all to use. These are all both open platforms that anybody can take, adopt, and use to their specific needs locally. Again, we're adapting various strategies to try and make sure that we are on our toes trying to support local agencies in doing this. And in doing so, we are also reaching across borders for the state. We're reaching out to our federal partners, our state partners, and local partners, trying to develop good relationships about how we can effectuate change and capture more of our water and put it into storage for later use. Next slide, please. So, upcoming guidance. These are a couple of big ticket items. I mentioned two of the sustainability indicators we're really circling back on. Most of the GSPs did a good job, a sufficient job, of addressing interconnected surface water and subsidence. However, these are both very challenging topics and difficult to address. So we're providing some guidance that will be out in winter of this year for interconnected surface water, and then fall for subsidence. The interconnected surface water currently already have a couple of papers out, just really framing up what is interconnected surface water depletions. And we'll be following those up in the next month or so with another couple of papers really nailing down what it takes to quantify depletions of interconnected surface waters with some specific examples to work through to give some appearance. We're gonna need to go over the summer into what we're hoping to be some good outreach with our partner agencies, CDFA, NAQUA, AQUA, and farm bureaus and the like, just to talk through what does it mean to define what is an undesirable result for interconnected surface waters. And those interfaces, those opportunities to communicate at the local level will be very important to tuning that guidance document and making it something useful for all to follow. The last bullet here is actually an item out of the water resiliency portfolio, and we've just been pushing this forward recently, working with CDFA, Executive Director Eddie, and as well as the State Board, CDFW, and the department to really start to talk about how can we trade and create water markets within a groundwater basin. Are there good points that we need to adhere to in terms of guidance to support equitable and clear communications about how allocations may be traded and still be protective of the conditions they're trying to manage in these basins. So we're working hard to advance that. The California Water Commission provided a white paper, I believe it was almost 2 years ago now, for us to guide our interagency team and develop a work plan to really develop some guidance on this topic. So we're looking forward to continuing that and getting those guidance documents out later in the year. Next slide, Josh, please. So a quick update on our groundwater conditions. This is an exciting part for the department. It's something that we've traditionally done under our Bulletin 118 activities. Semi-annually, we produce a groundwater conditions update, and this is a great opportunity that we're now finally seeing, some of the fruits of the labor of the local agencies and the GSAs and submitting all of their data. What's really happening on the ground when we are taking these actions. So this graphic you see here is a little bit of a, we'll go to the bad news side of things. The solid line's really depicting a departure from mean in the precipitation. It's clearly a downward trend. The dashed line in there is a representation of the groundwater storage in the Central Valley, and it pretty much mimics that precipitation decline. What it's highlighting, though, is when we have wet years, the blue bars, that water kicks back up. And we see those responses in the aquifer system. What we need to do is optimize those opportunities to capture those wet years, get those into storage, so we have them for the drier years. And what you can see in the graphic, the hotter colors, yellows and oranges, we're seeing a lot more of those. So this is the adaptation we need to be pushing forward with, just as recognition of our changing environment, and our climate adaptation strategies are necessary, and Sigma is a significant one here for us to maintain our current economic and uses of these groundwater resources. Next slide. Oh boy, this one's got some animation to it, Josh. So this is a little summary of the water year 23. So we're going to rewind a year. Coming out of 2022, it's drought. We're looking at potentially a third year of drought, and we're hit with the winter of 23 in January, where it began a series of atmospheric rivers, refilling our surface water reservoirs and then spilling into certain areas that we had difficulties managing flood controls with. We quickly pivoted and connected with all the local agencies that are actively developing recharge projects or have been doing recharge projects for a long time. Found ways to expedite those opportunities, provision of temporary pumps, helping them clear lands, helping them find temporary diversion pathways so that we're protective of the environment. We saw a lot of success at doing some of this work, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But let's see how the results turned out. So Josh, next. What we see, this is a nice comparison, looking at year 2021, 2022, and 2023. Groundwater pumping generally went down. We add water to the surface water system. We can rely on our surface waters more so than the groundwater. This is conjunctive use, a critical pathway for us moving forward. Next. We saw a great increase in managed aquifer recharge. We saw a great uptick in change in storage. So we went from declines of 6.4 million, 7.9 million, and in the 1 year we saw a rebound of 8.7 million. You do the math, we're still short. So that change in storage is still declining. Groundwater basins are declining. I'm going to try and hide this for me because I can't even see the slide. Oh, I thought I could. Oh, that's okay, next slide. We'll keep moving. So I think the managed aquifer recharge values that just popped up are the most impressive here. You can see we went from a wet year in 2019, we were recharging approximately 2.1 million acre feet. Our dry years, we still had recharge, right? So that's good, but very small amounts. Wet year, water year 23, 4.1 million acre feet, nearly doubled it. That's a tremendous leap forward in those 5 years where Sigma was just getting started. People recognized the need and stepped up and did a lot of heavy lifting. So it's a great report. I encourage you to take a look at it, understand some of these conditions, and we'll look at a few snapshots as we move forward. Next slide. Yep, of course, the thing's right in the way. There we go, that's better. So the total managed recharge. So managed recharge, we have two types of recharge. We have natural recharge, right? Water falls on the ground, it soaks in, it's going down. But we also have opportunities where we know there's coarser grained sediments that can move these waters deeper into our aquifer systems, and we can put water on those in greater quantities to get more water into the system. I think it's really telling, looking at some of the regions in the map, the darker purples are significant recharge functions that occurred. Managed aquifer recharge. Kern County, home of our preponderance of our groundwater banks, right? So we're moving a lot of water there on a regular basis, but they took every opportunity to put as much water into these banks as possible. There's a tremendous amount of storage in these areas. But you see it also going up the east side of the Tulare Lake Basin and San Joaquin Valley. And Kings and Tulare and Kauai, they all did a lot of significant recharge. What we can see in the table on the right really is just that balance of the increase in managed aquifer recharge. And what I want to point out is the number of basins reporting managed aquifer recharge. In 2019, it was only 9. In 2023, it's 21 basins. That's representing a significant input or advancement of the managed aquifer recharge efforts, and also a reflection of the investment that the state has made in providing grants to support these. Next slide. So the state, I mentioned earlier, the state's been working collaboratively, State Water Resource Control Board, CDFW, the department, to Bryce's point earlier, really looking at ways we can expedite recharge. How can we streamline the water rights system? How can we capture these flood flows? I'll just say we have a ways to go here. If you look at the numbers at the bottom, permitted capacity for these righted water diversions, 1.2 million acre feet versus what was actually put on the ground, less than 500,000 acre feet. So we're not finding opportunities to really capture those waters, even though they've been permitted and or authorized under various pathways. We deployed executive orders. We learned a lot from those, how we can prepare lands and be ready to capture and divert waters onto open and working lands. Tremendous value there. We've looked at management of and clarification of water code that allows for the diversion of floodwaters when a declaration of imminent threat to people and property occurs, that we can divert those waters off and put them into storage, alleviating a little bit of the flood stress on the flood control system, and ideally allowing it to recharge. Now, that doesn't come with a water right, but the conditions in the basin are better. And now the GSAs are there to help administer and make sure that those allocations that they may be administering can rise with the conditions. So if we're really improving the conditions in the basin, it provides a lot greater flexibility for the groundwater sustainability agencies to provide those waters to be put to beneficial use, all while avoiding undesirable results and operating to sustainable yield. That's the path forward for under Sigma. We're going to need to store more water to create those local flexibilities. We saw the temporary use change petitions largely for the Bureau of Reclamation to capture and divert a lot of those floodwaters. But those too were challenging in terms of the cost for diverting those waters and getting those waters out on the landscapes. So we have some room for improvement in all of these categories, and we'll continue to work with our sister agencies and our federal partners to identify pathways to enhance this. Next slide. Boy, I've been talking a lot about recharge. I think the big ticket item here is we've put out $121 million in grants to support 69 groundwater recharge projects. Each of those projects had a set anticipated benefit, how much acres and acre feet could potentially happen. But in looking through those, many of those had a sliding scale. Well, this is where we're starting, but we're planning on doing this. And so you see a lot of opportunity embedded in those. People are getting really creative about how to stretch their land, stretch their resources, and maintain agricultural footprint the way they so desire, and still reach the sustainability conditions in these basins. There are areas, though, that are in much tougher situation than others. So we have a ways to go. But this is where we're looking to the creativity of the farmers out there, the water managers out there, and we want to work with them through our basin stewardship to really enhance those opportunities and get as much of this supply augmentation in place rather than demand reduction. Next slide. So I think this is a valuable slide to put things in context. So the slide on the left, the 1-year groundwater level change from fall 22 to fall 23, what you see is largely green, blue, and yellow colors. That pretty much represents stable or increasing groundwater levels. So that water year across the state did a tremendous job at increasing groundwater levels. But the context, as we move to the right, we see the 5-year and then the subsequent 20 years. So we put the 1 year in context of the last 5 years. We still see some significant improvements, a significant amount in the Tulare Lake Basin, the southern end of the Central Valley. But we see in the Northern Valley where we didn't quite get as much water, we saw still declines occurring. So that wet year wasn't enough to tip the tide of the declining groundwater levels. And then in the 20-year trajectory, probably back to that first slide I showed where we see chronic declines of our storage, we see those groundwater levels still remain in deficit and on a downward decline. Again, the more we can provide greater opportunities to capture and store waters when we have high flood flows, the better off we're going to be at turning the tide on these trends and reaching a sustainable condition. Next slide. That might be it. There we go. So happy to entertain some questions and hopefully get you some good responses, but thank you.
Yeah, Tim, really appreciate your information there. Excellent job. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Mike.
Thank you for your presentation. So what have we learned about Floodmar? Doesn't seem like we've got much benefit from it.
Yeah, so working with various partners, teaming with the department, we have our Floodmar group within the department who pushed that along. But Sustainable Conservation's been out there doing a lot of heavy lifting with their GRAT tool and evaluation of crop types that when and where we can apply those waters safely without impacting production is still being socialized. What we heard during the wet year, we still heard a number of people saying, I was ready to take flood water, but nobody knew who to turn to get it. So a lot of those types of comments coming in. So again, we need to get information into the GSA's hands so that they can talk to the locals in their areas and tell them this is the methods to do this. We had CEQA exemptions. We've processed a significant number of those to allow specific lands to receive floodwaters and put those out there. But again, it's the socialization of it, knowing what we can do within the constructs that we have right now, the water rights and floodwater diversions. I think that opportunity needs to expand, and we need to find ways and we're working with our partners at the state board to navigate the streamlined permitting process to ideally leverage the 180-day permit that allows for those high flows to be diverted under a water right, but can also include a flood trigger. So if you've defined what a flood trigger is in your region, that's water you can divert off with outside of that limit. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. It needs to get leaner. It needs to get more flexible and greater opportunities, and we're working towards that.
The executive order did a lot of good. You agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, I think it opened people's eyes to what was possible. However, when it was codified in 1242.1, I think it is, things clamped down a little bit and it became more restrictive than the executive order was, and for good reason in many parts. But I think there's some opportunities there to clarify and streamline that. I believe it's also being hosted in a bill currently looking to add additional clarifications and opportunities where that executive order was codified. If that makes sense.
One final question. The permitting process, how has that worked overall? Because I've heard from some GSAs that have kind of given up on the permitting process.
Yeah. the permitting process, the 180-day permitting process, temporary permit, as well as the 5-year permit, still require a significant amount of work to identify what waters are available. And they call upon the 90th percentile. So they have to identify what the flows are within the system that above which they can divert. And it's a daily average. So it's kind of a complicated thing to track. There's also restrictions on the delta conditions downstream that further limit that. So I think there's a lot of action that needs to be taken to find workable solutions to capture those high flows when they're available in the system without limiting opportunities and operations in the state and federal projects and protecting the delta conditions. So it's a daisy chain of things that are limiting us, and it's going to take a coordinated effort to work out of it.
Tim, I had a question for you, and it's kind of down the same path. You know, the state Water Resource Control Board, you said essentially permitted capacity of 669,000 acre feet, but only 20,000 acre feet were taken under that permitting. So where's the hang up? I mean,
Yeah.
I really don't understand why, if such a large number were actually permitted and only 20,000 were taken.
Yeah.
Can I add to that question? Because I think that was the same kind of question I was going to ask. So I'm a huge fan of the concept of FloodMar and really would like to see it work. It's got a lot of potential. So to his question and mine, which is, what could we do to help move it forward to get in place? Because it's not just the permitting. I mean, that's a big one. But it's also the need for the infrastructure to allow some of this water to move. It's a lot of factors. And yeah, socializing is one thing, but I think that's the least of the problem, frankly. What can we do to help move that along?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we found in preparing the permits was many agencies there's a limited coordination between the flood control districts and the irrigation districts, people providing water. So we have infrastructure to move water around for irrigation, not always connected with our flood control systems in a way that we can leverage safely. So I think there's opportunity to, again, coordinate between these flood control districts, the irrigation districts, the GSAs, our permitting agencies. So I know Central Valley Flood Protection Board is looking closely into how they can help and provide guidance to their flood control districts. But it's about connecting these people and making sure that they understand who they can talk to prepare and be ready to divert these waters. So there's also a water quality aspect we have to be aware of. The board has the regional boards have limitations on where we can put waters on open and working lands adjacent to active dairy ponds or fertilizer applications, timings of those. So there's added details in there that we need to make very clear that each year we need to be prepared for that following winter to capture those high flows without having something stymie us along the way. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. Sustainable conservation with our GRAT tool, I think it's a tremendous tool. It evaluates both the crop type, the timing, and the infrastructure that's available. And the department is pushing along on that with infrastructure projects as well, just understanding where are the limiting factors and what can we do in a planning sense to provide information. So absolutely excellent point. So to me, it's about coordination, connecting people.
And Tim, is part of it the timing of the permits? Maybe
Yes.
the permitting is for a certain period of time and the water flow comes at a different time, or?
Absolutely. So that's the challenge. So I mentioned the 90th percentile flows. It's on a daily time step over 10 years. So you may have a peak flow that makes this one day really, really high, and your flow that you observe in the system is just below it. You can't divert because there's something skewing the data set. So I think we need to get smarter about how we define what are high flows in our streams, what are those thresholds at which we can divert, safely and protective of existing water right holders downstream, safely in respect of the ecosystems that are there. So there's a lot moving there, and we need to just keep sharpening the pencil on that one.
Understood. And I understand it's very complicated, but Bryce, one quick question, and we've got to move on.
Well, thank you for
And
the report on Sigma.
online.
It's a massive undertaking, and thank you for the report. I do agree with your graph that, and I think the point of these discussions have been, or questions have been, how to maximize these wet years, and I can tell that that's got your attention. One thing I guess I would just say in relationship to Sigma is we've been tracking a bill, AB 2079, as it pertains to Sigma. It's and the concern that we have about 2079 is that we have a big state, and I think Sigma recognizes that one size doesn't fit all. You've got local ground GSAs, and 2079 seems to me to be a break from that it'll be the state that decides where wells can go in and when wells can go in, and it really, Governor Brown used to use the term subsidiarity, and let the locals do it, and when the locals can't do it, then the state can step in, and this seems to be a break from that on AB 2079. Any comments on those thoughts?
Sure, I can speak very, very briefly to 2079. The department is involved with it, helping Assemblymember Bennett advance it. 2079 is intended to do a couple of things. One, it's intended to connect the well permitting agencies with the GSAs. Clear communications, open those lines of communication. What are the thresholds? What are the issues? What's the GSA having to do to achieve sustainability in the basin? And pass that information on to the permittee. So the permittee is aware, as they're spending big money to develop a well, what could be the limitations put on their well and the waters they pump from it. It's also trying to connect on a couple of key issues: dry domestic wells and subsidence. Subsidence in the valley in particular is breaking infrastructure. It's breaking our ability to convey surface water from where it is to where it's needed. So the more we pump, the more we subside. The more we subside, the less surface water we get, and the more we pump. It's not a good mode of operation. So this is intended to pause new wells going into high impact subsidence areas and really give the GSAs time to manage the pumping locally. The law does allow for permitting of those wells to return to those smaller areas once subsidence has abated, and there's some specific specifications in there. The impact to dry domestic wells is really about well interference. What's the proximity of a new high capacity well to a public drinking water supply? So it's intended to think a little bit more, provide some prescriptive spacing, and the prescriptive nature of 2079 is solely intended to provide the local enforcement agencies, the well permitting agencies, typically the counties, authority to continue to issue permits under a ministerial function. So there's not a long delay. They don't require CEQA. They're not triggering CEQA analysis of every well that's going to go in if they meet these prescriptive rules. However, 2079 was just updated this morning. I think it was just came up. And there, to your point about local control, it allows for local ordinance that achieve these same objectives to be applied in lieu of these prescriptive rules. So we hear you loud and clear, and that's embedded in the law now, providing for that local, and that's really where we want it to go, is very localized, clear understanding of what the conditions are that impact dry wells and well interference and Sigma implementation. So if the local ordinance can address these things, then it's still local. And I think that's the ideal pathway, but providing a prescriptive set of rules allows for the LEAs to continue their ministerial process in administering well permits with a few caveats, right? And so take a look at that. The prescribed level of subsidence, is something that has been questioned as well. So they're trying to address those issues now. we'll be editing as we go, I'm sure.
Tim, I need to ask you one more question, and we understand you're working on a definition of a small farmer. We so we just want to open the door and tell you that hopefully there'll be good collaboration between DWR and CDFA on working on that together.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love it. So I know we've had conversation with Executive Director Eddie in the past, and I understand the challenges with defining that. So we're pretty sensitive to it. We did receive comments from California's Alliance of Family Farms, specifically on that issue, and it's a tough one to define.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can define a small farm. We understand.
Precisely.
It's difficult. Okay, we're going to check online for any questions.
So yes, I had one question from the board, and then I'll open for public comment. David Mancera asked that DWR spent $121 million for 69 groundwater recharge projects. It seems like a lot of money. Are we measuring returns on investment? And are farmers receiving any of those dollars? And if so, how are they using those dollars?
Yeah, excellent questions. The grants are administered to our groundwater sustainability agencies, who in turn are effectuating projects listed in their groundwater sustainability plans. So I would assume at some point in time, those dollars do trickle down to a landowner where these recharge projects are effectuated. Or they could be purchasing land. That's something that we are not tracking explicitly. However, the return on investment is echoed back to us on an annual basis. We're watching those metrics about managed aquifer recharge, how it's increasing, how the number of projects are increasing. And this is the story that we hope each GSA tells us on an annual basis. Look at the success we're having. Look at how we're advancing our plan and putting these dollars to good use. I think with that sort of commitment to communicating the value of that really helps the legislature make informed decisions in the next round and opportunities for providing additional funding when these opportunities occur.
Perfect. Thank you. And now we're going to open it for public comment. If you would like to comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I can unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
Well, Tim, thanks again. Always a pleasure, and it seems like we always go long when we discuss water here. As you know, pretty important topic, and appreciate all you and your department does in working through SGMA and some of the many water issues we face.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the 2024 Farm Bill perspective. We have Ann Macmillan, invariant GR, and leads Invariant's food and agriculture practice. Invariant is a innovative bipartisan government relations and communications firm providing strategic advice to companies, trade associations, nonprofits, and individuals. Prior to Invariant, and served as senior advisor and I apologize, Ann, my page is stuck here. And chief of staff to the U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, where she developed and implemented the agency's regulatory agenda and managed the secretary's policy team. She was also senior policy advisor to Speaker Nancy Pelosi and worked for Representative Dennis Cardoza. So welcome, great to have you with us. Sorry we went a little long talking about water.
It was fascinating. I told Josh I was learning a lot there.
Really
So thanks.
good to have you with us for an update.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have just a couple slides to keep myself. Josh, it says that my host screen sharing is disabled.
That's not good.
No. Let's see.
Does that work now?
Well, let's see. Yes, it does. Okay. Let me get my screen into sharing mode. Okay. So thank you so much for having me today. I'll just go a little bit, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll just go a little bit about me because sometimes people are like, why are you talking to us? And so I'm talking to you because I'm from California and I've been through a lot of farm bills. I started with the 2002 Farm Bill with Bob Matsui from California. I was with the 2008 Farm Bill with Congressman Dennis Cardoza. I was with Nancy Pelosi. I was with Secretary Vilsack during the 2014 Farm Bill. I worked briefly for the wonderful company here in Washington, D.C. And then I am currently the chair of the Food and Agriculture practice here at Invariant during the 2018 and the 23, 24, and hopefully not 25 Farm Bill. Just a little overview. The Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years. The last Farm Bill was passed in 2018 and expired in 2023, and then it was extended until 2024. The House and Senate committees have jurisdiction over this Farm Bill, and you can see this is the sort of baseline spending. We talk a lot about money in the Farm Bill conversations right now we always talk a lot about money, but this year feels particularly like we spent a lot of time talking about the money, and you can sort of see where the allocations are projected from the last Farm Bill. This is I show this chart just to like have a lot of respect for the Byzantine sort of complicated process in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure most of you are aware that it has become even more Byzantine and a little more chaotic every day here in Washington. But basically each side, the House of Representatives Agriculture Committee does a bill and they work through their process. And then on the other side of the Capitol, the Senate Agriculture Committee does a bill and they work through their process. And they are supposed to, at some point, hopefully soon, I'll get to that, come together and have a combined product called a conference committee product that will be considered on both the House and Senate floor and then hopefully signed into law by the president. This process is complicated, so often it goes off the rails. In the past, since I've been working on farm bills, we've had presidential vetoes, we've had veto overrides, we've had all kinds of problems in this process, and this year is no different. A couple key players in each in every farm bill. In the government, obviously we have the Senate and House chairman and ranking members. We have House and Senate leadership that are involved in this process currently. We have the USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack and the White House Domestic Policy Committee. Those are sort of the key players within the U.S. government who are watching and engaging on this farm bill. Major stakeholders outside of Congress are the commodity organizations, and I say that commodity to include specialty crops as well, and then include the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance, which is an umbrella organization for every specialty crop organization in the United States. The American Farm Bureau Federation and individual state farm bureaus, the Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and other conservation groups, FRAC, Center for Budget and Policies Priorities and Feeding America, and other hunger groups. Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, and AEI are sort of conservative-leaning organizations that have major sway with the Republican side of the House. Just a little bit of an overview of how we have gotten to today, and then I can tell you about California's sort of impacts and then where we're going from here. So Farm Bill, this is the 2024 Farm Bill to date. So it expired in 2018. The 2018 Farm Bill expired in September of 23. It was extended, and there was some orphan programs. Orphan programs are programs that don't have baseline, and so without additional dollars, they would cease to exist. So they were extended and funded through September 30th of 2024, which is rapidly approaching. The Farm Bill is it's probably fine to go until the end of calendar year 24. Usually we don't have any problems. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, has usually enough in the reserves to get by for a couple months. The commodity programs usually have enough money in the reserves, and the pricing doesn't revert back to the first Farm Bill in 1942 until usually early sort of the following year. So we should be okay until about January. Members and the House Agriculture Committees did a very robust stakeholder input process in 2023. They used both the House and Senate Ag Committee use online submission portals to formally track member and stakeholder input. And they had significant hearings in 2023, both on the House and Senate committees. I do not expect, even if there are further delays with the Farm Bill, if we go past September 30th, which is highly likely, and into potentially the fall and winter, it's unlikely that we'll have additional hearings on these bills. The only thing that would change that is if the Farm Bill does get passed into the 2025 post-election, and there's a change in leadership in either the House or Senate that could spark a refreshed review of the Farm Bill. We have been waiting for some excitement on the Farm Bill, and then May was a very active month. So the Senate Agriculture Committee Democrats released a 96-page summary of the Rural Prosperity and Food Security Act on May 1st. It is a Democratic only work product, but it included, they claim, I haven't fact checked this, but over 100 bipartisan bills in that product, but it was understood to be a Democratic work product. The House Agriculture Committee held a markup of their version of the Farm Bill on May 23rd. The legislation passed by a vote of 33 to 21, with all Republicans voting for it and 4 Democrats voting for it. They adopted 25 amendments through a marathon markup session that went from 11 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. the following morning. 25 amendments were offered, 4 were rejected, and 18 were authored and withdrawn. We are expecting the Senate Agriculture Committee ranking member to release Senate Republican priorities next week, as soon as next week. A couple priorities in each bill. So I will just start before I get into the House and the Senate. This has always been understood because of money challenges to not be a revolutionary farm bill. In the history of farm bill since the early 1940s, we have had some attempts at revolutionary farm bills. Mostly they have been failed. The 1996 Freedom to Farm Bill, it comes to mind. But we did, for example, in 2008, have a pretty revolutionary farm bill where it was the first time specialty crops were added in a meaningful way. And there have been a few examples along the way where there have been, I would say, like pretty meaningful change. It has always been understood, I think, that this year's bill, because of the funding constraints and because of the challenges in Congress and the thin margins, that it was unlikely to be a monumental, revolutionary bill. So what I'm about to tell you, which is from the California priorities in both the House and Senate bill, it's good. It is a lot of maintaining what we have and some incremental increases. So as you can see, there's new and increased funding in the House bill for specialty crop priorities, including the Specialty Crop Block Grant, Specialty Crop Research Initiative, the National Organic Program, programs that California utilizes very much, and programs that we will continue to utilize moving forward. There was a big push in both the House and Senate from the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance to add new resources for crop insurance for specialty crops. And both the House and Senate bill, but the House bill in particular, put some new resources for an advisory committee and other directions to USDA to really start responding to the concerns of the specialty crop industry of the lack of proper crop insurance coverage. There were changes to dairy, including additional changes to the dairy margin coverage program, and all of the programs that impact dairy were extended and improved for the life of the next farm bill. The conservation dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act in the House bill were reinvested in the farm bill baseline and distributed throughout. There were technical improvements made to RCPP, which is a public-private partnership that California has had great success with utilizing in the past. And there was also some addition of items like precision ag as a factor into EQIP awards, which again is a program that California utilizes greatly. And there was additional funding for new populations of SNAP recipients in the House bill. The House bill was hundreds of pages. There are multiple titles. I picked out the ones I thought were most important, but I'm happy when we move into the Q&A, answer additional questions. I just ask that you don't ask me questions about the dairy program because I've never understood it since I started working for Dennis. that's 20 years ago, and I'm not sure I could answer any questions on that, but I will get back to you if you do have a dairy question. Let me just move so in the Senate, again, Senator Stabenow, who is the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee in the Senate, she comes from Michigan. She comes from a specialty crop state. So I think arguably there were bigger improvements to things that specialty crops care about in the Senate bill. Significant new investments in the specialty crop block grant program, the specialty crop research initiative. There was an entire subtitle in the crop insurance title for specialty crops, including, again, a new advisory committee and directing USDA to prioritize developing insurance products for specialty crops. Similar increases in the dairy margin program and other improvements to organic dairy market data, which is, I think, something that the organic dairy guys have been asking for quite some time. There were no changes to nutrition funding, which I will get into in a second. And they included significant new access for underserved populations in SNAP, bigger federal match in TFAP, which is the food bank program, produce prescriptions, GusNIP, like seniors farmers markets, like everything you could possibly put on a wish list for nutrition were funded in the Senate bill. The climate sideboards remain on IRA conservation funding. I will just briefly touch on that. The IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act bill that was negotiated last year. It put nearly $40 billion in USDA conservation programs. That money has been spent down to some degree, but that money was supposed to be making, it had what we call climate sideboards, or sort of directives to utilize those funds within USDA programs to achieve significant climate mitigation benefits. That money has been under review, or it's been very attractive to utilize in the Farm Bill baseline. I think both the House and Senate agree that it should be funneled back into the baseline, which from the bean counters gives it greater longevity. The question about whether those climate requirements should remain with those funds is up for debate, and something that is included in the Senate bill and not included in the House bill. So in addition to the climate sideboards, there's a lot of technical improvements in funding for a range of conservation programs that are utilized in California, including CRP, CSP, and EQIP, and a new focus and a very big focus on methane reduction in EQIP, which I think is important for California dairies and other livestock entities. Here, oops. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, well, what now? Let me tell you. As I mentioned in the beginning, the lack of funding is complicating next steps in both the House and Senate Agriculture committees. We are far short of money to pay for all of these ideas. And in Congress, not always, but most times, in order to spend money, you have to offset it in some way, or you have to find money from a different committee or a different program to pay for your new investments. The House has identified 3 major offsets to fund their farm bill. One is changes to the Thrifty Food Plan. They would essentially prohibit the administration from utilizing the Thrifty Food Plan to increase SNAP benefits going forward. This is a tool that the administration has utilized over time to basically assess whether the SNAP benefit package is sufficient in order to meet a healthy meal. The Biden administration in 2021 increased the Thrifty Food Plan allocation, which resulted in roughly a 20% increase in SNAP benefits. They did that unilaterally with this authority, and there was significant pushback and concern from Republican members in Congress about whether they had that authority and whether or not it was necessary. So the House offset makes changes to the ability for the secretary to utilize that authority moving forward. They also, as I mentioned before, reallocated Inflation Reduction Act conservation money and put it back into the Farm Bill conservation title baseline without climate sideboards included. And the third big bucket of money that they found was that they limited the secretary's future use of CCC spending. So CCC means the Commodity Credit Corporation. I could go into the specific details, but it is essentially a slush fund that is available to the secretary. And the former President Trump had utilized it for COVID relief for farmers, for market facilitation payments for farmers impacted by trade. Secretary Vilsack has utilized it multiple times for, again, a lot of COVID supply chain offset issues and a multitude of different programs. So limiting the secretary, whether that's Vilsack or whomever it will be next time, limiting the ability for them to utilize that money and utilize that sort of slush fund bank account saves money. So the House plan reinvest those savings back into their Farm Bill proposal. The Senate has a pledge of $5 billion in offsets from Leader Schumer, who's the leader of the Senate majority. And he is, I think, pulling that. It's a little unclear, but I think he's pulling that from a customs fee change that generates $5 billion in offsets. So we have here what I call four corners, which are we call collectively the four corners are the four leaders of the House and Senate Agriculture Committee. So we have the chair and ranking member of the Senate and the chair and ranking member of the House. They have all, unfortunately, I'd say, sort of put some pretty firm red lines down about spending, about policy, about next steps, about how big and the size and scope of each farm bill. And where we are right now is in a bit of a standoff. And without these four corners finding their way out of their corners currently, it's a little murky on next steps. The conventional wisdom out here in Washington is that the House markup was certainly a market mover event, and that there's some real activity, but the Senate needs to act now in the Senate Agriculture Committee, and that probably the most likely outcome is that something is informally negotiated between those two work products, and something is passed in Congress and signed by the president in a season we call lame duck, which is that time of the year between after the election and the end of the calendar year. It's a special session where Congress comes back to finish up loose ends from about mid-November to the end of December. And there's 1 million different scenarios that can go into whether or not there's a strong chance that happens or not. The least of being who wins the election and who loses the election. And all of that is sort of up in the air at the moment. So I wish I could give folks more certainty on the next steps, but that is from a bird's eye view. California is doing really well on both of these bills. It's just not totally clear where this all ends. I will stop my share there. I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm sorry, my office has like a fishbowl situation, so I apologize if people are walking behind me and disrupting my presentation.
No, and thank you very much. It really, it's a tough thing to explain.
It is.
And you did a great job. So really, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for questions from the board. Glenda?
Well, not so much a question, but as in my role with Cooperative Extension and the Ag Experiment Station, both of which get extensive, Farm Bill funding, we had extensive briefings this last week from Louis Burke, which is our lobbyist back there in DC. And I'm thrilled to say your briefings and theirs are saying the same thing. So
yeah.
for whatever that means, it means at least.
Thanks, Glenda.
Well, I mean, seriously, that's important because everybody's still got big, giant question marks on where this is going to go. And I think you nailed the question marks almost identical to where they nailed them. I think, you know, the key is for all of us here at home and in other states too, getting the message out about what these programs actually do and how they serve and, you know, what the return on investment is. So if you want to expand on that a little bit, please feel free.
Yeah, I will just say, I mean, and I think you know, one of the challenges of doing this farm bill, and I'll say, is that there are some, and I use the word commodity sort of loosely, so not only just like you know the corn, cotton, soybean, et cetera, but also, you know, different specialty crops. I think there are commodities that are desperately need a farm bill. They desperately need changes to some of their programs or some of their, you know, reference prices if you are one of those covered Title I commodities. There are some that are okay one way or the other, and there's some that don't need it. And I think it's really important to try to understand that this only comes along once every 5, well, maybe 6, and hopefully not 7 years. And we have to keep pace with certainly those who need it today, but even those crops who are in these other categories or research institutions or whomever, they may not need it today, but they might need it next year. And we can't have this farm bill. I just would feel awful if it's under sort of my watch and at our time in life where we can't get together and pass a farm bill. Like, it's just not acceptable, and we shouldn't stand for it.
Joy, you had a question online there?
Yes, I put 2 questions in the chat, but one of them is here. Let me get my face there. There I am.
Okay.
One of them is hi. One of them is specifically regarding broadband. Are there allocations for getting connectivity to the last acre to enable ag tech?
There are, both bills have pretty significant investments in broadband. I think there's a little bit of difference on how they approach it. I think there's I would say the last acre and the last mile is definitely important. I think a lot of the conversation in Washington has been focused on unserved, and you know, because that is the piece that is the least profitable for broadband companies to cover. And so I think there was finally some compromise that, you know, there's some priority allocations for those continued priority allocations of broadband funding for 90% unserved areas, which hopefully is getting at this last acre, last mile question that continues to come up.
Is there anywhere we can see the verbiage?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
I would love that.
I will say the House bill is all written out. The Senate is a summary document, so it's a summary, and no one has seen the actual sort of the language behind it, but I will absolutely send that to you.
Thank you so much. And then also, I was very happy to see the focus on specialty crops. That should benefit California tremendously.
Oh yeah, 100%. I don't want to toot my horn, but when I was working with Dennis Cardozo in the 2008 Farm Bill, it was the first time that the specialty crops had their own title. It was, you know, we sort of were able to nudge or push our way into the Farm Bill. And I work for some specialty crop organizations now. All of these programs hugely benefit California. And we know we just have to keep pushing. And I will say there are, even the specialty crop programs like the block grant program and the research initiative, those are all, I think, excellent programs. But unfortunately, California is now in some of these other buckets where we haven't been in the past, particularly with respect to disaster. And, you know, with the atmospheric rivers and the climate change, I think this new focus on having a better safety net through crop insurance, it will really pay dividends moving forward.
Thank you.
Good. Josh?
Perfect. And thank you so much for, herding the cats on this. We greatly appreciate it. I think 2 questions, actually. So is there any concerns from both parties in regards to limiting the Secretary's use of CCC, specifically in regards to some of the climate challenges we have, but also pest challenges? Because that's where CCC is usually tapped into in terms of disaster payments, et cetera. And it seems there would be more of a unified kind of response about the flexibility there.
Yes. Okay. I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. I think there is some understanding that the House proposal to completely cut off the secretary's utilization of CCC is probably unsustainable, because of, listen, it's an important tool in the toolbox. I think they're playing around with a lot of, I will say, just sort of like budget gimmicks and ways to make it less draconian. And I think that's where we'll end up if that offset continues in this debate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think kind of my
Yeah.
follow-up question on that is, I think it's always a difficult year, it seems like, for the agricultural industry, especially with the disasters, et cetera. But we've seen, and also just from COVID recovery, but we've seen significant investment by USDA tapping into IRA funds in regards to climate smart commodities and the Resilient Food System
Yes.
Infrastructure Grant Program. A lot of support to the industry directly from federal funding. And I'm wondering, are any of these having any opportunities for kind of inclusion within the Farm Bill, or is just baseline prohibiting all of that and no one's really wanting to make changes?
No, I mean, listen, I think I think this concept of a public-private partnership in particular for climate smart commodities and or just like how we're addressing the supply chain, I'll just give the data point that the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, which was a CCC funded exercise, I think it was $4 billion of actual money that they had to give out, and they had requests in for upwards of $80 billion. So you can see that there's like clearly a need and desire, and I think that was very compelling to members of Congress, that there's clearly some need to and desire to leverage federal dollars for climate outcomes. I think this is also a negotiating conversation. I think there are, as we move forward, there will have to be some give and take on whether or not some of these climate requirements continue forward. And I think there's somewhat broad acceptance that these programs have started to work, and so we should continue them. In exactly the same way, I don't know. In exactly, every dollar having the same climate sideboards, it's probably more difficult.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Do you have any public comment?
I would ask a quick question.
How quick? Short,
Thank,
with a short
thank you so
answer.
much, Ann. It is a great
Oh.
presentation, great detail, and appreciate your positive approach. I've been watching, I don't know if you use the program or the platform, myfarmbookie.com. I don't think it's a USDA or CDFA, not even Cooperative Extension sanctioned platform. But, the smart money's on, it's going to get passed before January 1st. Is that true? You were saying in the
Wait, is this like a legitimate like booking site, or are you just being
it
funny?
is not. It's a made up platform in my own head. Okay, there isn't a farm. I mean, there's a website, I think, for everything, but I'm not sure there is for the farm bill.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you,
I
Ann.
would
You
be
don't have
surprised.
to
I'm
answer
just
that.
well, no, I will just say, I think it only gets more difficult, and that is what I've been trying to say and trying to sort of talk with members of Congress and other key thought leaders out here in Washington. It's not as though we have more money next year or less problems or less conflict. It just gets worse. So I think there should be real focus on getting this farm bill done in this calendar year. And with the team that is in place and the policies that are on the table in some way, shape, or form. And that's why I said these four corners have sort of painted themselves into different corners, and we need to figure out how to get everybody back to the table. And I have a lot of faith in in the leaders, particularly the two chair people, Chairwoman Stabenow and Chairman G.T. Thompson. They desperately want a farm bill, and I'm hopeful. And you can't do ag policy in Washington without telling yourself every day, we're going to get a farm bill this calendar year. So that's what I tell myself.
Perfect. If you'd like to make a public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I can unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
Well, and really want to thank you. That was really informative, and I've got a lot of questions I could ask you, but I'm not going to. We're running behind schedule as.
I know, you're way ahead of time.
But really
Well,
really
it was
appreciate
so
your
nice.
your input.
Thank you. So nice to see you guys, and I appreciate all the work that you do on behalf of the great state of California. So enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
All right, our next presentation to the board will be the California Jobs First. We have Derek Kirk, California Labor and Workforce Development Agency. Derek Kirk is the Assistant Deputy Secretary of Climate at the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. In this role, Derek supports the Labor and Workforce Development Agency's participation in California Jobs First, an initiative to create thousands of additional jobs across all regions of the state. So welcome, good to have you with us.
Good morning, I think, for another 2 minutes. My notes are still good. President Cameron, board members, I appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you all day. If you'll allow, I'd like to just spend a few minutes doing some storytelling and bringing everybody up to speed on really the last 13 years and California's economic development journey during that time. So I'd like to take you all the way back to 2011. Upon being sworn into office, then Lieutenant Governor Newsom embarked on a journey to establish a vision for the way in which California can engage in our economy. After reading all the local and regional strategies, industry profiles, talking with universities, local government officials, etc., Lieutenant Governor Newsom partnered with a small team to develop and publish what he called the Economic Growth and Competitiveness Agenda for California. Some of you may remember that. It was the first economic development strategy that California had had in over 10 years, and I will note is the last statewide economic development strategy that California has had since, and we're now obviously at 13 years since that point. The Economic Growth and Competitiveness Agenda was largely praised across the state. I have found fun quotes from my own secretary at the labor agency when he was a local representative in the North State, from individuals like then Mayor Ashley Swearingen and others that were excited about the opportunity for a statewide economic development strategy. That agenda, as it was framed, really focused on 8 core pillars of work. Those included gearing up our exports, reinvigorating California's manufacturing sector, which is really we have the largest manufacturing sector in the country, driving innovation, which has largely been a backbone of our economy, accelerating the clean economy in California, skilling up workers for opportunities, building infrastructure, aligning with our strengths, and organizing the state government for success. In addition to the 8 pillars, the strategy laid out a set of guiding principles that included governing for growth and accountability, practicing partnership, building on our industry strengths, removing barriers. I was watching the webinar earlier and hearing about things like Sigma and others, investing in our performance, acting with urgency, and sustaining our commitment for the long haul. Hopefully, after hearing the pillars and guiding principles, you're recognizing that while this agenda was developed in 2011 during his term as Lieutenant Governor, it really has served as a guide to the ways in which Governor Newsom has continued his commitment to the economy. So jumping forward now, upon being sworn into the office of governor in 2019, Governor Newsom tasked then GOBIS Director Lenny Mendonça to launch the Regions Rise Together initiative, an effort to reach the inland parts of California that have historically not gotten the necessary attention or investment from the states in decades gone by. I will just as an aside say, as a Tulare County native, the initiative was certainly an attention grabber for me, and was a way in which this governor and this administration built real trust with partners in the Central Valley. While the COVID-19 pandemic waylaid additional outreach measures, the governor remained committed to prioritizing regional economic development. And in 2021, this commitment to economic development took a step further through his championing of a history-making investment into economic development with the signing of SB 162 in 2021, which established the Regional Investment Initiative, which at the time was called the Community Economic Resilience Fund. The Regional Investment Initiative is co-managed by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. It is what we are calling the signature program of the governor's new California Jobs First brand. The California Jobs First brand is intended to represent and align all of our economic development related programs across the 9 engaged agencies, which I'll mention in a minute. Under the Regional Investment Initiative, the state has been divided, all 58 counties, into 13 economic regions. These regions were built off of identified trends in labor market and industry data. And then each region was provided with $5 million to support the establishment of a new governance structure, inclusive of both those historically involved and not involved in decision-making around the economy. I'll just note as an aside here, the U.S. Economic Development Administration is typically the entity that has invested in strategy development at the local level. Right now, the most expensive strategy in California that EDA has funded was about $150,000. And so our investment of $5 million has created real opportunities for these regions to do the necessary and in-depth research and outreach to really fully wrap their arms around our regional economies and begin strategizing for what comes next. These new Jobs First collaboratives, as we're calling them, are in the process of developing regional Jobs First strategies, identifying priority industry sectors, considering ways to engage the workforce more effectively, and identifying ways to build a stronger relationship between the economy, our communities, and our climate, as well as building out investment playbooks. I know you all are hearing later today from the F3 initiative in the Central San Joaquin. They're really a fabulous model for what we hope every region in the state has moving forward. So for the first time, we're providing resources and authority to our regional partners to design and begin implementing the economic future they want for themselves, their families, and their neighbors. Those strategies are due to the state on August 30th of this year. So jumping now to 2024, on March 8th, Governor Newsom formally established the California Jobs First Council. I will say that date will forever be burned in my brain because it was a very exciting opportunity for us here at the state. This California Jobs First Council is a new governing body intended to bring all of the relevant state agencies together that have a role in economic development to coordinate on our approach and align our investments. This new council is co-chaired by the Director of GoBiz, Dee Dee Myers, and the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, Stuart Knox. It also includes the leadership of Secretary Ross here at CDFA, the Director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency, the Secretary of the Health and Human Services Agency, the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs Agency, the Secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency, and the President of the Public Utilities Commission. It's interesting, we hosted our first Jobs First Council meeting in May, and many of the secretaries were excited to participate in the conversation and admitted that their agencies don't see themselves as economic developers. And this is our opportunity to help explain to them why they are in fact economic developers and partner with them to highlight the fact that they have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in their ongoing budgets that impact economic opportunities in communities. The governor has tasked this council with the development of a new industrial strategy for California, which we are calling the Jobs First Operational Plan. It's really up to our regions to develop the strategies, and it's now up to the state to ensure that we don't take those 13 strategies that we paid $5 million for and put them on the shelf in my office and say that was a really great exercise and we'll see you again soon, but really to implement them, which is why we're using operational plan in our vernacular. The operational plan will include 5 core chapters. First, we're going to take all the research that the state has funded in each of these regions and partner to build a statewide profile of what does our economy look like? What's the state of industry sectors and clusters and workforce across the state? And from there, we will identify priority sectors California has never really had an identified list of priority sectors before, though we have made committed and sustained investments in sectors like agriculture. We'll have this list of sectors that we can all start to wrap our minds around. The second chapter will be an investment playbook. We are excited to have an understanding of all of the different types of projects that regions want funded and that the projects that they believe will move the economic needle in their communities. The third chapter will be a chapter on business development. Some of you may know, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GOBIDS, leads our economic development and business attraction efforts. They've never had a strategy for the ways in which they're doing that, and this plan will include a business expansion, attraction, and retention strategy. We will couple with that, Chapter 4, a workforce development strategy. We're really trying to look at this as a supply and demand conversation for the first time in California. And then lastly, as a best practice, we're gonna develop some understanding on monitoring and evaluation. Do our investments make sense? We talk a lot about unemployment as a measure of the economy. Is that really the right measure of the economy? And what other metrics should we be looking at moving forward? The operational plan will be designed based on engagement with our regional partners and their jobs first strategies, as well as additional engagement with industry across the state. I hope to have the opportunity to come back before this board to shop that strategy around and gain your feedback as the agriculture industry remains a vital part of California's economy. And I know for those of you that don't know, the Secretary of Labor comes from a cattle ranch in the North State. So he's pretty committed to making sure that agriculture is deeply a part of this strategy. So some of you also may know that in August of last year, the governor signed an executive order mandating the creation of a new master plan for career education. That will be the first time that we have had a new master plan since the 1960s. These two documents will really work off of each other and are intended to serve as roadmaps for the ways in which we're engaging the supply and demand sides of our economy. I will say also, it's thrilling to me to be a part of an administration that's actually using supply and demand language around managing our economy for the first time in California. We'll be working to finalize the operational plan later this year, and then we'll begin collaborating across the 9 agencies, again, including CDFA, to embed this plan into our investments and our work. I spend a lot of time listening to and learning from the people that have been leaders in this space before me. This is not the first time California has tried to do something in economic development. I know that people have invested their entire careers to helping all of Californians have access to quality jobs and vibrant economies. People like, some of you may know Trish Kelly at Valley Vision, Ashley Swearingen at the Central Valley Community Foundation, and your own Glenda Humiston at UCA&R have invested so much time and capacity and commitment to this. And I'm excited about the foundational work that they and our governor have laid. It's created an incredible opportunity for us to really seize this moment and ensure this new way of practicing economic development becomes woven into the fabric of our state. And I believe that that's exactly what we're gonna do. Lastly, I recently watched a fireside chat that then Lieutenant Governor Newsom participated in at the PPIC in 2011 on the development of the economic growth and competitiveness agenda. In that conversation, he quoted Michelangelo, and I just thought it's become such a relevant piece to me. Michelangelo said, "The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it." And California's historic commitment to economic development and partnership with regions has been too low. And we sometimes have hit it, and sometimes, quite frankly, we have missed it. But our aim with California Jobs First is high, and I believe that we have the right people in the right place at the right time to meet the moment. Thank you so much for the opportunity to brief you on California Jobs First, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Derek. Great presentation. We have any questions from our board members? I look at you, Glenda.
Well, I don't know that it's a question, but I have to say, Derek, I'm thrilled you brought up that 2011 plan. Because, I think a lot of times all of us get frustrated that it seems like we're constantly reinventing the wheel instead of building upon earlier work and foundations that have been laid. And that is one thing I think Governor Newsom, deserves a great deal of credit for. He has continued to follow the pillars of that plan since 2011. And organizations like the California Stewardship Network and CalEd and everybody rallied around it. And I think that's why we are seeing some significant results right now.
Yeah.
So it's just great proof on, you know, we can't fix these issues overnight, but if we stay at it and we have a general framework that we all can at least agree to, even if it's only we agree to disagree on a few small things, we can get somewhere. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah,
So thank
100%.
you.
Yeah, of course. I will
I
say.
still I have that in my files. I still share it.
Yeah, it sits on my
do.
desk and has for the last 2 years that we've been working on this initiative. And you know, I spend a lot of time, as I mentioned, talking with folks like Trish Kelly and others about the fact that, you know, we're trying a different way of doing the same thing that we tried 10 or 15 years ago, and that's okay. I think right now the moment that we're really at is how do we make sure that we're embedding this work in a different way.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think we're doing it in a different way. I think these are big, complex, complicated issues with many moving pieces. I mean, research, workforce, finance, research and development, et cetera, infrastructure, many competing pieces. And it's taken these several years to just socialize and educate and get people to agreement. It doesn't happen overnight.
That's totally
That's why so many people, I think, try to reinvent the wheel, because they get frustrated after a few years that some silver bullet didn't solve the problem. And so let's reinvent, you know, what the solution is, instead of investing the time and energy to really thoughtfully move forward and get something happening.
Yeah. Thanks, Glenda.
So, Derek, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I think from the board's perspective, it would be helpful to know how best we can help. Because I know that, you know, the board working with the department really focused on kind of an ag vision to kind of lay a pathway for agriculture for 2030. I think we're working definitely with Glenda and our CSU partners on a master plan for agriculture in terms of education. So how can we best kind of weave in some of that work and also our partnership with your agency and workforce development in terms of doing, looking at trying to scale up kind of the agricultural workforce that we have throughout and our partnership with F3. So how further can we kind of integrate?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josh. I appreciate it. You know, we are, hopefully you sense we're not here to reinvent the wheel, that we don't have time or capacity to reinvent the wheel. We're really trying to lean in on the expertise of individual leaders and also boards like this across the state. We're hopeful in the next couple of weeks to bring on a consultant that will help guide this process. That consultant will be reaching out to each of the 9 agencies and certainly boards like this one to understand what documents you already have. We want the regional strategies to be a core driver of this work, but we also know that there's been recent work, again, from boards like this one that have an immense opportunity to impact the operational plan and its development. And so we'll definitely be reaching out with the consultant team to read and digest those types of strategies. The director of GoBiz and the Secretary of Labor have also asked a few of us to start leading an industry engagement effort. GoBiz and Labor have not necessarily been the closest of agencies in years gone by, but Director Myers and Secretary Knox are really great partners and friends and are determined to do industry engagement together across our priority sectors, of which we know agriculture is a critical one. And so I think partnering with this board to drive further industry engagement, to also help our regions further in engaging with industry. We've got really great examples like the Central San Joaquin Valley and people like Ashley that have practiced this for many years now, and other regions that are still figuring out how to do that, right? Like the southern border and the ag industry in Imperial County. How are we engaging with our partners in a different way and not just focusing on the emerging technologies? So I think helping us understand the visions that you all have cast for this particular industry sector, but also in the coming weeks and months, helping us figure out how best to engage with the ag industry across the board. Aside from that, Josh, we talk a lot in our office about the incredible partnership that the labor agency has with CDFA. The employment training panel, which is under the labor agency, recently committed $10 million to supporting ag tech workforce training. We're excited to partner with people like Karen Aceves at Arkan Strategies, who I know you'll hear from later on the ag tech certifications that she's working on. And so, we've got a deep commitment to continuing not only to further programs like that, but hopefully to mainstreaming it, right? We've done a lot of that with dollars that we've had some flexibility on, but ideally, no matter who is the next secretary or member, governor or members of the cabinet, that's just the way we do things in California. So hopefully, and I think our ask of you all would be to, partner with us on institutionalizing some of that framework in the next couple of years.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek.
Yeah.
All right, no other question from our board. Do you want to check for any
If you'd
public?
like to make public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I can unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
All right. Of course, Bryce.
I didn't hear Joy say it, but the completion of broadband into the rural areas, I think would really help in the rural areas be more economically viable. And of course, Joy, I'm trying to channel you in that.
I very much appreciate that. Actually, the Department of Technology has placed a couple of staff members at GoBiz on the Jobs First team to make sure that that's a deeply embedded piece, because it's not only critical to, I think, digital equity in our state, it's also critical to driving innovation and emerging technology. So definitely a well-noted point. Yeah.
All right, no other questions. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your presentation and your comments. Thank you. All right, we are going to take our break for lunch here. Those of you online, we will be back at 1 o'clock. So thank you for joining us this morning. Hope you join us later today. Thank you.